Everybody well rested?
Yeah.
Looks like a lively group. Terrific. Well, good morning, and thank you all for joining us as we close out another historic and highly productive spring session of the Illinois General Assembly. I'm genuinely proud of our major accomplishments, and I'm grateful to my partners for their tireless efforts to deliver for this great state. We didn't shy away from addressing the immediate challenges that face Illinois families or the long-term ones our state has begun to overcome. And we didn't let extremists or self-serving special interests get in the way of finding real solutions. It took hard work, compromise, and creativity, but that's what's required to make transformational progress for the people of Illinois. For the 6th consecutive year, I introduced and the legislature passed a balanced budget that invests in our future while putting money back in the hands of hardworking Illinoisans. It seems like every year there have been the usual naysayers with their false narratives about our budget. But this is year 6, not year 1. The record is clear. We grew the rainy day fund to over $2.3 billion. We increased our state's pension funded ratio. We paid off our overdue bill backlog. We eliminated nearly all short-term debt in the state, all while surpassing a $1 trillion economic GDP output. Our record of fiscal responsibility and responsible investments is well established. If you don't want to take my word for it, just ask those who independently evaluate our state's creditworthiness. Over the last 3 years, Illinois has received 9 credit upgrades and attracted more and bigger investors than ever before. Our state is in its strongest fiscal position in decades. This FY25 budget continues that progress. That starts with our youngest Illinoisans and their families. We're building on the historic successes of the Smart Start Illinois program with a $400 million investment in preschool access, child care workforce, early intervention, and home visiting programs across all of Illinois. This budget also creates the new Department of Early Childhood, which will make it easier to serve children, parents, and providers. We also continue our march toward educational excellence with historic levels of funding for our K-12 public schools, another year of record reductions in teacher vacancies, and expansion of career and technical education. We expanded scholarships and MAP grant funding, bringing us to a highest ever investment of $761 million in total to make sure that every person who wants to can access high-quality higher education in Illinois. The FY25 budget includes nearly $3 billion to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families, and the systems that support them. This is the largest ever amount invested in DD, a testament to our consistent commitment to rebuilding supports for our most vulnerable. One of the challenges facing families across America has been affordability, especially for those trying to raise a family. Rising prices have hit working families the hardest, so we focused on finding ways to reduce costs and put more money in their pockets. That's why we eliminated the state sales tax on groceries and then created the first ever Illinois child tax credit, providing as much as $300 for working class and middle class families. We're also eliminating nearly $1 billion in medical debt for more than 300,000 Illinoisans in financial peril because of an injury or illness totally outside of their control. Healthcare needs to be more affordable and accessible. So we took on predatory insurance practices and put power back in the hands of doctors and patients through the Healthcare Protection Act. For too long, a patient seeking medically necessary treatment would be delayed or denied because of an insurance executive hundreds of miles away who knew that they could make an extra buck for the insurance company. Illinois has now prohibited that. In fact, we have put into law a nation-leading package of reforms that makes it easier and more affordable for people by banning step therapy, banning prior authorization for crisis mental health care, banning junk insurance plans, and ending unchecked rate increases for large group insurance companies. All of those things improve affordability and access to health care. I told you last February that I'd put my shoulder to the wheel to get this done, and I'm very grateful to the many advocates who helped get it across the finish line. I'd especially like to thank the chief sponsors of the Healthcare Protection Act, Representative Anna Mueller, Senator Robert Peters, and also Senator Laura Fine, who got Democrats and Republicans together to give this a strong bipartisan majority. Comprehensive health care access means fully protecting reproductive health care. This session, we set out to not only affirm that fundamental right, but build an infrastructure where every woman, no matter her income level, her race, or her zip code, can have a safe and healthy pregnancy. So we launched one of the most robust birth equity initiatives in the entire nation, aimed at closing the tragic gap in maternal mortality and morbidity between Black women and other new parents. It invests in birth centers and providers in underserved areas, expands home visiting, and establishes a pilot program for women who cannot afford diapers. Illinois' new birth equity initiative will save lives, address the unfairness in health treatment at the beginning of life, and build a foundation for a better, more critically competent, community-based care. I'm deeply grateful to all of my General Assembly partners, especially Majority Leader Robin Gable and Senator Lakeisha Collins, for being chief sponsors of this legislation. And I want to make sure to recognize the tireless advocacy of this from a champion of women and families, our Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. Finally, this budget invests in revving up the engine of economic growth in Illinois and creating well-paying jobs of the future. Since I took office, we have attracted business investment in cutting-edge new industries, invested millions of dollars in capital projects to improve our infrastructure, and made Illinois more competitive with other states when companies are looking for a new home or to build a new facility. In FY25, on a bipartisan basis, we created new incentives to attract private investments to Illinois, and we have set aside matching funds to aggressively compete for federal research and development dollars. That includes investment in a quantum computing campus to make Illinois the undisputed leader for an industry that can attract billions of additional dollars in private investment and create tens of thousands of jobs. We passed transformational legislation that promotes development and a diverse array of industries. That includes electric vehicles, quantum companies, manufacturing, film and television production, and R&D, diversifying and strengthening our economy. Through it all, we maintained our commitment to sustainability and fighting climate change. No place was that more evident than in our historic bipartisan framework for safe carbon capture and sequestration, which balances our promise to promote industry development while protecting our environment. Finally, to briefly recap, we lowered costs for working families. We invested in our children. We secured transformational economic development and job creation opportunities, all while strengthening our state's fiscal health. Thank you very much, and now I'd like to introduce my partner in governance, our great Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton.
Good morning, everyone. I am Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, she, her pronouns. I'm thrilled to be here celebrating the passage of our administration's 6th balanced budget. To our fearless leader, Governor J.B. Pritzker, thank you. Time and time again, you prove that good leadership can be effective without sacrificing compassion. To Speaker Welch, President Harmon, the lead budget negotiators, and all of our partners in the General Assembly, thank you for your support and commitment to getting the job done. I know it's been a long couple of weeks, but it was worth it, and we celebrate your efforts. And finally, to all of our state agencies and staff, including, of course, Gambi Director Alexis Sturm, thank you for your tireless dedication. You carry the weight of this work, and because of you, Illinoisans are waking up to a brighter future. For years now, you've heard me say, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. I cannot think of a time when those words were not more applicable than they are today. The passage of the FY25 budget is a testament to this administration's vision for a more prosperous and equitable Illinois. We are standing here today because everyone came together to get this done. Our collective aim has always been to uplift working families in every corner of the state, from combating homelessness to stopping predatory insurance practices to expanding access to holistic birthing care. This budget was steered by a shared moral compass. It prioritizes the humanity of all and reflects our belief that every individual deserves the chance to live a full life. I'm immensely proud to serve alongside Governor Pritzker, whose principled leadership has put our state on a path of fiscal stability and inclusivity. The transformative investments made in this budget will have a profound and lasting impact, paving the way for future generations to dream even bigger. Thank you, and with that, I'll pass it back to the governor to answer questions.
Thank you very much. And I want to add my thanks to our budget director, Alexis Sturm. She really does amazing work. She works 24/7, and I really mean that. Her phone is on next to her bed, if in the middle of the night there are questions, and she spends all year helping us put a great budget together and then helping the legislature through the process of getting it passed and on my desk. So thank you very much, Alexis, and happy to take any questions from Jeremy.
Sailed overwhelmingly through the Senate. Once it got to the House, it had more than 70 sponsors. These were ranging from conservative Republicans to progressive Democrats. Sailed through a House committee yesterday. It was never called on the House floor, and we know that you've been opposed to the bill. I know that you wanted to issue an executive order with some of the substance that was in this bill. Did you talk to Speaker Welch about this, perhaps, before it could have been perhaps considered on the floor? Any insight into why it wasn't called?
I can say that we were not opposed to the bill. We were opposed to aspects of the bill. And remember that we did actually, over the last couple of days, issue an executive order to do exactly what I said we were going to do. And so how the processes of the House, especially late at night, early in the morning, unknown to me. But I can tell you that there are aspects of that bill that are fine, and some aspects of it, frankly, that are just unacceptable. It's not about transparency, to be honest with you. It's about what's actually possible, what's doable, and also funding. There was no funding for any of the things that they suggested that we should do. As to what the process in the House was, I can't tell you.
Governor, people make the best decisions when they're sleep deprived. Why is it responsible to pass a budget at 4:45?
Well, the budget came out about a week ago, so people have had almost a week to look at, every aspect of it Thursday. But whatever. I mean, there are days and days. People who like to say, oh, it came to my desk an hour before we had to vote on it. That's not true. That didn't happen this year. The fact that they voted on it early in the morning was really a function of everybody wanted to go home. It had been a pretty long couple of weeks, I think, for the legislature.
Governor, what contributed the roll call situation on the revenue bill?
Sorry, what contributed?
Situation on the revenue bill where they couldn't keep 60 people on the floor?
I don't know. I mean, I watched it, I hate to say, like many of you at 4 in the morning, but I can't tell you what the process was that led to that.
You can tell me why 7 Democrats didn't vote for the budget.
Well, good news, there are 78 Democrats. You're welcome. And in fact, it was a great budget. And the fact that there are some who disagreed on aspects of the budget is just a function of what Will Rogers once said, which is, I don't belong to an organized party, I'm a Democrat. Hannah.
Before Fred Crespo voted no on the revenue package, he stood up and, said, I'm a Democrat, but, this makes me worry. I think that next year we're going to be facing this cliff and we're going to be asking even more of taxpayers. I mean, can you respond to that criticism?
Well, every year we start the year with challenges, looking ahead. How, what are we going to do in the next year? How do we pay for the necessary things for working families across Illinois? And we spend the year working through that till we get to the budget address in February. And then there are months for the legislature, who already are aware of many of the things that are in the budget before I actually introduce it, for them to debate it for months until May. And so it's hard to say why somebody would all of a sudden wake up and decide that the budget isn't quite right for them, but you'd have to ask him.
That we would have to, ask for a service tax or an increase in the income tax.
Every year, particularly Republicans, say things like that. They say, oh, we're careening toward a brick wall. It hasn't happened. 6 years in a row, we have balanced this budget. And we have made sure that we're thinking about and lowering costs for working families every time we put a budget together. So, I'm pleased with how the budget ultimately came out. 6 years of balanced budgets for Illinois, that's a record.
Can you talk about budget investments for veterans and specifically address a concern from a new member, ran twice around the floor, saying there was less funding for veterans than new arrivals and migrants in the state?
Well, you could find all kinds of things to compare one piece of the budget to another and say, well, we spent more on education, for example, than we did on veterans. That's true. We spent billions and billions of dollars on education, and that's what we should be doing. And by the way, dealing with the humanitarian crisis, it's not something that's like a regular line in the budget. Let's hope that we don't have more crises. Ever since I've been in office, every year there's been some crisis that we've had to deal with, whether it was my first year with a fiscal crisis that I inherited, or in the subsequent couple of years with COVID, and then migrants being shipped here from Texas. So that's not something I think will be repeated in any way, but it is something we needed to address because we're human beings in Illinois, especially. We care when people are suffering. And that's why there was funding available for us to give basic care for people who happen to be shipped here by a Republican who wants to cause chaos across the United States. Dave? Yes, sir. Yeah, sorry, let me.
Speaking of, the funding and money that's going to combat the migrant crisis, obviously the big X factor in that is over the next year we don't know how many more migrants the governor of Texas is going to send up here.
Yeah.
How prepared are you and how prepared is this budget to handle whatever number he says?
Well, we prepared appropriate to what we think might happen. Can't tell you exactly, but it has been clear to me that the Republican governor of Texas is taking the advantage of the fact that Illinois is going to host the Democratic National Convention. And so, why else would you send busloads of people who aren't asking to be sent to Chicago, to this state, to this city? But I would bet you when the political spotlight is off of Illinois, there'll be some different choices that he and others will make. Honestly, Republicans have been completely irresponsible when it comes to border security and comprehensive immigration reform. They need to come to the table, as they did before Donald Trump told them all to walk away. And we actually had a bill that nobody was thoroughly happy with, but it was probably the right thing to do. And yet, Donald Trump told them, don't vote for it because we want to cause political problems. They thought for Democrats, they're really causing political problems, not just political, other problems for the people of the United States by not voting for a border security bill.
The hemp industry in the state did not get across the finish line to get called in the House.
The bill to what?
Regulate the hemp industry.
Hemp, yeah.
In addition to a bill, a cannabis omnibus bill, neither of them got called in the House. Just your thoughts on that and what's happening forward there.
Yeah, I think obviously there are lots of things that didn't make it to the finish line. But, we got, as far as I'm concerned, everything that was a priority for me, if you look back at the things that I talked about and put in my budget address, all the priorities that I put in got passed. And once again, we have a responsible, balanced budget.
Can you speak to the interchange fee prohibition and how businesses should react to this?
Maybe I'll turn it over to a budget expert here.
Yeah, that was a request from the retail merchants, and so, we'll be working through the legislation that passed.
Yeah. I think, to be clear, there were things that we thought were probably the best outcome in order to make sure that we were right-sizing what retailers get in, a payment from the state in a world where most of it is pushing a button on a computer to get a result. And we had essentially one of, if not the highest percentage that was going back to retailers, so it made sense to right-size that. And there were a few things that needed to be changed in the process, so I don't think there's anything hyper unusual about it. Yeah.
Governor, next, why is the Investing Kids program being allowed to disappear?
You'll have to ask members of the legislature. I mean, that was something that got decided a year ago, and I know that there are people who'd like to bring it back, and I had meetings with many of them, heard them out. This is something the legislature decided to do, and I think there's a real need to make sure that we're focusing on funding public schools properly. And very importantly, and I talked about this, and maybe this is too much detail for you, if you're going to have a tax credit like that, we ought to let the federal government cover much of the cost of it, which we weren't doing. This was all done, as you know, in the kind of dark of night, I guess is the way to say it, from 2017 when this program was created. And it was created in a simplistic fashion in a way that cost Illinois taxpayers more than it should have. So if you were going to re-up it, it needed to be changed. And anyway, they decided not to, and the change never took place either. So, yeah. Sorry, interchange fees, yeah.
I believe you said we might work through the legislation as is. Do you feel like this is something that might have to get amendments or changes based on which factors you think be able to be implemented as is in the language?
Well, I don't think so, but that doesn't mean that the legislature might not revisit it. I have no idea.
Lieutenant Governor, can you talk about the historic investment to address maternal mortality? I know there was a big push for you this year.
I would like to call on the Lieutenant Governor, who really, she championed this. And I mean, it was something that I talked about in my State of the State, but the Lieutenant Governor, day in and day out, talked to members of the legislature to get this thing done. So,
Thank you, Governor.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so the Birth Equity Initiative, as you know, was proposed by Governor Pritzker. It started by talking to women in communities, especially Black women, doulas and midwives, who a year ago told us and pointed to the data that the Department of Health shares, which is that Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications. But it's not just about Black women. We think about women in rural communities and in so many ways where all women deserve access to affordable and accessible health care. And so the Birth Equity Initiative does that. It's affordable by eliminating the cost sharing. It is affordable because it allows things like the child tax credit and other aspects to give people the resources to make the best birthing choices for them and their families. And it is accessible, and so we are making it accessible just as we did with Medicaid coverage. It is now applying to private insurance, and that's good for Illinois families. It's good for Illinois women. It is something that will be life-saving for many and also family-saving. And so I'm really proud of the work that's been done, and I'm grateful to not just Governor Pritzker's leadership, but certainly the leadership of Leader Robin Gable as well as Senator Lakeisha Collins.
Question. I don't know that we've heard you take a stance on Delta 8. Do you think it should be banned? Is it undermining the legal cannabis industry?
I think it should be regulated.
In what way?
Well,
Should certain products be grandfathered in?
I believe that an unregulated product like this, which clearly has caused some health problems, ought to be regulated by the state. How the implementation of specific parts of regulation, I wouldn't jump into myself. I'm not an expert, but what I would say is that it's clear that it is not for medicinal purposes. It's not regulated the way the cannabis is, and yet it ends up on the market, and people don't really have, there's no restriction on who gets it, how much they can get, et cetera. So I really believe that, we need to step back and ask what is in the best interest of the health of kids and adults across the state, and I think regulating it is proper.
Last night we heard plenty of talks about the upcoming budget, fiscal year 2026, with more spending pressures. The RTA obviously has a big gap that they need to fill. I mean, how challenging, I guess, is it, especially given that some Democrats were also expressing concerns that maybe we're going to attach well too quickly, increasing spending too quickly in this current year that's going to make next year more challenging?
Well, let's take the RTA and the transit issue aside just for a moment because it is an unusual thing that we're all going to have to deal with. Let's just talk about the main budget here. And the truth is the Republicans every year come up and complain. They complain and complain and complain. And every year they have fewer things to complain about. We balanced the budget for 6 years in a row now. We paid down all of our short-term debt. Even outside agencies, credit rating agencies, and the civic committee, civic federation, others that look at what the state is doing, what we've been doing in our administration, say we're in a much better situation now than we've been in many years, and certainly since before I took office. So I'm proud of that. I think we're, again, headed in the right direction. Once again, very responsible things being done. The pensions are being paid. Money's being put into a rainy day fund. Think about all those responsible things that were done this year. We cut taxes on small businesses in ways that I don't think everybody has noticed yet. But that is a true fact that gets ignored. So the complaints of Republicans on the floor, I think, 1 out of every, 12 things that get said is true and maybe we should look at. And I have had meetings, many meetings, and you can ask leaders with Republicans to ask, okay, what kinds of things do you think we ought to be putting in the budget? Here are the things that I think that your members, your colleagues would agree with that I put in the budget myself. The franchise tax cut, for example, was my idea. I've been pushing it every year. The Republicans actually have not been asking me every year to do that. I think it's the right thing to do. I started doing that back in 2019, and other than the bad year of COVID where we had to stop that, every year we've been lowering that tax. So I'm focused on making sure that we're doing the right things, working across the aisle and getting things done. The complaints of Republicans, frankly, are, every year they get sort of crazier and crazier because things have been going in the right direction for our state.
$500 million for quantum. There's been reported that the state is in the running for a major anchor tenant. I think PsiQuantum has been reported. How contingent is this project on getting that major anchor tenant for this campus? What do the next steps look like for quantum with this?
Well, $200 million of that is matching funds to match the federal dollars that we expect that we might be able to receive from the CHIPS and Science Act in Washington or the IRA. And so that's 200 of it is just contingent dollars. The other part is a campus that is hyper unusual. There really are only a couple places in the country that have even thought about doing this, and we're way ahead in terms of trying to actually get something done. And I've had many, many meetings with companies whose names you would know. You may not have heard of PsiQuantum before you read that story, but it is one of the largest startups, literally like $1 billion funded startup in the quantum field. But many companies that you have heard of that are, focused on science and technology and Fortune 100 companies have had conversations with us about locating a portion of their work on this campus. So I'm very optimistic about what we're going to be able to do in quantum. And I want to give credit here to the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, to UIC, and especially to University of Chicago, which has one of the best quantum development teams and research that you can find anywhere in the country.
Specific to the city of Chicago, you met with Mayor Johnson here at the Capitol less than a month ago. It's pretty well known what some of his priorities were going into the meeting. Obviously, he didn't get the $1 billion that he wanted through the EBF, like the Chicago Teachers Union wanted as well. But specific to Mayor Johnson's priorities, can you talk specifically about what made it into the budget from him in the city of Chicago? Anything that you can think of?
Look, I think that some of what got reported was kind of a misinterpretation, in my view, of differences. The truth is that we all think that education should be better funded. And the fact that the mayor was willing to come down here and make a case to people about it, and that others were, here to make a case about it, was, it's their priority. It ought to be our priority to put more money into education, but not just for the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago is 20% of the population of the state. So we have a lot of other people, a lot of other kids across the state going to school. We need to fund their schools better too. So I thought that was an appropriate, kind of message to be sending for a mayor. And I was, there are so many things that I think people who come and meet with me and I agree on. For example, I really believe that our local and county governments, our municipalities across the state, are important frontline providers for the people of Illinois. And that's why we send LGDF money. That's why we provide opportunities for more road money to go to local governments for, building infrastructure like water, sewer, et cetera, to help them build it when they can't afford to do it. And so I really think that it was appropriate for him to come. I think mayors from all over the state come to the state. It just, he come to the Capitol rather, and he just happens to get a lot more attention than anybody else. Yeah, hi Isabel.
Building revenue was a big point during
Sorry, which
building revenue was a big point during budget discussions this year. Was enough made? Were Democrats able to get enough revenue for future budgets, this budget? What were your expectations on that?
Well, again, the principal, there were basically, one and a half things that we were asking for that were relatively new. One was, the sports book change, which, by the way, got improved upon because it was turned into a graduated tax, which works better, and that's how we do casino revenue as well. And that was really the largest piece of tax increase. And then, that is paid for by sportsbook companies, and mostly by companies that don't reside in the state of Illinois. So there's some advantage in many ways for companies that are based here in Illinois as against those outside. So, did we get the revenues that we balanced the budget. That's actually the goal. And I know there was a lot of talk on the floor last night at, was it 2:30 or 3 in the morning? But by Republicans about, wait till you see what they're going to tax you on next. Well, they've been saying this for every year that I've been in office, and it hasn't been true. I mean, in fact, if you look at what we did, really our focus was on asking people companies that can pay more to pay more. And indeed, we kept the tax on sportsbook lower than the top states in that arena. We are third, and there are, talking about third in terms of revenue in that industry, and yet we had one of the lowest tax rates at 15%.
That bill passed out of the Senate 54 to Delta 8.
Delta 8.
That bill has passed out of the Senate 54 to 1.
Yeah.
Gets over to the House, and I know that House Democrats got a poll to see how many would vote for it, and it wasn't brought up because they didn't have enough. Do you think that so many House Democrats like the status quo of hemp being unregulated? I mean, everyone knows how harmful Delta 8 is to kids out there.
Everything has its time. I wish that one, I think, like I said earlier to Hannah's question, I think it should be regulated, but sometimes things have to work their way through people's minds. They have to listen to people in their districts, to think about it more, hear an argument that makes more sense to them than the one they heard last. And so I'm disappointed in a way that the bill didn't go through, but not surprised. As you saw, there are many, many bills, thank goodness, because I think 5,000 get introduced or more. There are many, many bills that get pushed aside or pushed to the next year to consider. I hope that there's some movement and thought about what this might look like in the veto session or in the new session, but not surprised really. Yep, thank you.